Wesley Lynn Ruiz spent nearly 15 years on death row, his days ticking down in a Texas prison. In the frantic chaos after a high-speed chase crashed to a halt, he fired a single panic shot that ricocheted off a police officer's badge and tore into his neck, ending Mark Nix's life in an instant. But to understand how Ruiz ended up in that deadly moment, we need to rewind to the broken beginnings that set his path in motion. Born on November 20th, 1979, in Dallas County, Texas, Wesley Lynn Ruiz entered a world already stacked against him. As a Mexican-American child in a rough urban neighborhood, he grew up amid the harsh realities of a fractured family. His parents abandoned him early on, leaving him without the stability most kids take for granted. This neglect wasn't just emotional. It plunged him into a cycle of deprivation that defined his young years. With no steady home or parental guidance, Ruiz faced homelessness at times, bouncing between unstable living situations where basic needs like food and safety were never guaranteed. Poverty hung over everything, a silent force that made survival feel like a daily battle. What little structure he had crumbled under the weight of these hardships, planting seeds of resentment and fear that would grow unchecked. The abuse Ruiz endured added layers of trauma that no child should face. From a young age, he suffered severe physical beatings, psychological torment, and emotional cruelty that left deep scars. Worse still, he experienced sexual molestation, a violation that shattered his sense of trust and security. These weren't isolated incidents. They formed a pattern of neglect and harm that experts later linked to lasting damage. Medical evaluations revealed he had fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, likely from prenatal exposure to alcohol, which wired his brain for struggles with impulse control and quick thinking in stressful spots. On top of that, the constant trauma led to post-traumatic stress disorder, complex trauma, and even brain damage, making everyday decisions feel like navigating a minefield. His mind, shaped by this chaos, often reacted with raw instinct rather than reason, a coping mechanism born from years of feeling unsafe and unseen. School offered no real escape from this turmoil. Ruiz made it to the 11th grade before dropping out, his education cut short by the distractions of an unstable life. Without a supportive family to push him, academics took a back seat to just getting by. Teachers might have seen a kid with potential, but the weight of his home life, or lack of one, pulled him under. He wasn't causing major trouble in class yet, but the signs were there. A growing anger, a wariness of authority that hinted at bigger storms ahead. By his early teens, Ruiz started brushing up against the edges of the law, though not in ways that landed him in serious trouble at first. Petty issues simmered, fueled by the poverty that pushed him to scrape for basics. As Ruiz hit his teenage years, the harassment from local police became a relentless grind. In his Dallas neighborhood, being Hispanic often meant extra scrutiny from the gang unit, who profiled kids like him as threats. Peers recall how officers would pull him from his car without cause, search him roughly, and rough him up, leaving bruises and a burning sense of injustice. It was tiring, one friend said. Wes was exhausted by it. We all were. These encounters weren't random. They stemmed from anti-Hispanic bias that treated young Latinos like suspects just for existing in their own community. Ruiz faced beatings, disbelief when he reported crimes against himself, and even watched cops withhold help from a kid in need right in front of him. This constant targeting built a wall of distrust toward law enforcement, amplifying his PTSD symptoms into a hair-trigger fear response. What started as survival instincts in a neglectful home evolved into a deeper paranoia, where every authority figure felt like a potential enemy. These run-ins didn't turn him into a hardened criminal overnight, but they chipped away at any hope of a straight path, steering him toward riskier choices as he sought belonging in a world that seemed determined to push him out. Yet, amid this darkness, glimpses of Ruiz's humanity shone through. He held down a job as a truck driver in his early adulthood, showing a work ethic that suggested he craved normalcy. But the foundations were too shaky. The abuse and neglect had molded him into someone quick to react, his impaired brain struggling to pause in heated moments. Poverty kept opportunities out of reach, while the police harassment reinforced a sense of being hunted. These factors didn't define every choice he made. Plenty of people rise above similar pains, but they stacked the deck, creating a young man primed for trouble when life spun out of control. As Ruiz navigated his 20s, the weight of his past loomed larger, hinting at the collision course ahead. What would happen when that buried rage met a split-second crisis? In the early spring of 2007, tension simmered in Dallas as police hunted for a vehicle linked to a brutal capital murder. On March 21st, detectives issued an urgent bulletin. Be on the lookout for a 1996 red and gray Chevrolet Caprice with dark-tinted windows and chrome wheels. 2 days later, on March 23rd, everything escalated when plainclothes officers spotted a matching car cruising along Stemmons Freeway. They radioed for backup, tailing it discreetly as it exited onto Mockingbird Lane and headed into West Dallas. But what started as a routine surveillance quickly spiraled into chaos. Would this lead to a breakthrough, or something far deadlier? Senior Corporal Mark Nix, a 33-year-old dedicated Dallas police officer with a family waiting at home, was the first to respond in his marked patrol car. He pulled up right behind the Caprice, flipping on his overhead lights and siren to signal a stop. For a split second, the suspect vehicle slowed, brakes lighting up as if complying. Then, in a heart-pounding twist, it roared back to life, accelerating wildly down a narrow, winding road lined with homes and fences. Nix gave chase, his dashboard camera capturing every tense moment as speeds climbed dangerously high. Another patrol car joined, lights flashing, but the Caprice showed no signs of surrender. The pursuit twisted through West Dallas, the suspect weaving recklessly. What was the driver hiding that made escape worth the risk? The chase reached its breaking point when the Caprice hit a sharp curve too fast. Tires screeched as it slammed into the left curb, spun out of control, and slid backward down a slight grassy incline on the right side of the street. It came to a jarring halt facing the road, its rear end jammed against a chain-link fence, trapping it in place. Nix skidded to a stop hood-to-hood with the suspect car, while the second patrol unit blocked the passenger side, boxing it in completely. The crime scene was now a quiet residential stretch turned battlefield, dimly lit by streetlights, with dark-tinted windows on the Caprice hiding everything inside except a faint silhouette behind the wheel. Officers couldn't see if the driver was armed or alone, heightening the fear in those frozen seconds. Nix leaped from his car, baton in his left hand and pistol in his right, rushing to the Caprice's front passenger window. He swung hard at the tinted glass, trying to shatter it and gain control. Pausing briefly, he set his pistol on the ground to grip the baton with both hands, pounding away until he punched a small hole through the pane. Glass cracked under the force, but before he could react further, a single gunshot exploded from inside the vehicle. The bullet shattered the rear passenger window, striking Nix's police badge on his chest. It splintered on impact, sending a deadly fragment slicing into his body at the clavicle level, severing his left common carotid artery, a vital lifeline that poured blood in an instant. Nix staggered back, collapsing as fellow officers scrambled to pull him to safety. The wound was catastrophic. Despite frantic efforts to save him, he was pronounced dead at the hospital, his life cut short in a blur of violence that left his family shattered and the community reeling from the loss of a protector who had given everything to serve. The emotional toll was devastating. Mark Nix wasn't just an officer. He was a husband, a father, a son whose sudden death ripped through his loved ones like the bullet that felled him. His wife and children faced an unimaginable void, haunted by the what-ifs of that night, while colleagues mourned a brother in blue taken in the line of duty. The tragedy echoed far beyond the scene, a stark reminder of the razor-thin line between routine police work and heartbreaking sacrifice, fueling grief that lingered for years as the case dragged through courts. In the immediate aftermath, Ruiz, alone in the Caprice, faced a barrage of return fire from the officers, who unleashed a hail of bullets to neutralize the threat. He didn't flee. Instead, he slumped behind the wheel, hit multiple times, and slipping into unconsciousness. The pistol he had fired lay in his lap, smoke still fresh from the barrel. Officers held their positions, dragging the dying Nix to cover and calling in a SWAT team for backup amid the echoing gunfire and shouts. What secrets would the wounded driver reveal once captured? SWAT arrived swiftly, extracting the injured Ruiz from the vehicle and rushing him to medical care, where he survived his wounds. He was arrested at the scene, the damning evidence, including patrol car videos and the weapon, sealing his fate as investigators pieced together the deadly encounter. But questions loomed. Why the desperate run, and what drove that fatal shot? Wesley Lynn Ruiz didn't offer an alibi in the traditional sense. He was pulled from the wrecked car at the scene, bloodied and unconscious, with the smoking gun in his lap. Instead, his initial defense hinged on self-defense, a desperate claim that he fired only because he feared for his life in that chaotic moment. Ruiz testified at trial that as Officer Mark Nix bashed at the tinted window with his baton, he heard Nix yelling threats to kill him, making him believe death was seconds away. He insisted the police shot first, forcing his panicked response in a split-second haze of terror. But could this story hold up against the cold, hard evidence, or would it crumble under scrutiny? Prosecutors dismantled Ruiz's self-defense argument piece by piece, leaning heavily on unshakable video footage from the dash cams of Nix's patrol car and another officer's vehicle. The recordings captured the entire sequence, the high-speed chase ending in a spin-out crash, Nix rushing to the passenger side to break the window for visibility and control, and then the fatal shot bursting from inside the Caprice before any officer fired back. No audio picked up the alleged death threats Ruiz claimed, and fellow officers on the scene testified under oath that Nix never uttered such words. They described him as focused on subduing a fleeing suspect, not issuing personal vendettas. Ruiz's version painted him as a victim reacting to aggression, but the videos showed Nix as the one exposed and vulnerable, baton in hand, while his pistol lay on the ground, contradicting any notion that police initiated the gunfire. Defense lawyers tried to bolster the claim by offering witnesses to Nix's past incidents of alleged excessive force, 3 separate cases, including a 2002 fatal shooting after a traffic stop, a 2005 tossing of a Marine for public intoxication, and a 2006 rough handling of a 14-year-old boy during a chase. These, they argued, proved Nix had a pattern of overstepping, supporting Ruiz's fear as reasonable. But the judge ruled it out under Texas evidence rules, calling it irrelevant character attacks that could unfairly prejudice the jury. On appeal, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals later agreed any exclusion error was harmless. The videos already established Nix as the first aggressor by approaching aggressively, yet the jury still rejected self-defense, focusing on Ruiz's intentional act amid his flight from police. What hidden biases or pressures might have swayed them further? The trial, held in Dallas County's 194th Judicial District Court under Cause No. F07-50318, M, unfolded over tense days in the summer of 2008, with high stakes from the start. Key moments kicked off in the guilt phase, where prosecutors played the gripping dash cam videos multiple times, letting the jury relive the chase's adrenaline and the gunshots echo, emphasizing Ruiz's choice to flee and fire rather than surrender. Officers took the stand, recounting the horror of dragging a bleeding Nix to cover while unleashing return fire, their voices steady but laced with grief. Ruiz's own testimony became a pivotal showdown. He spoke of his terror, claiming the tinted windows hid the officers' identities and amplified his panic, but cross-examination poked holes, highlighting his prior run-ins with the law and the car's link to another murder investigation as motives for evasion. The defense pushed back, arguing Ruiz's actions stemmed from a lifetime of trauma, though they shockingly failed to dive deep into his abusive childhood or diagnoses like Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder and PTSD. Flaws later blasted in appeals as ineffective counsel rooted in racial bias against their Hispanic client. As the guilt phase wrapped, tension mounted. Would the jury see a scared man or a calculated killer? Shifting to the punishment phase, the atmosphere grew even heavier. Prosecutors painted Ruiz as a lifelong threat, parading evidence of his gang ties, drug involvement, and veteran criminal history to argue future dangerousness, including expert AP Merrillet's testimony that even a life sentence could see Ruiz in less restrictive prison settings after 10 years. Later revealed as false due to a 2005 rule change locking capital lifers in high security, but not corrected at trial. Dozens of uniformed off-duty police officers packed the courtroom as spectators, creating what defense lawyers called a hostile and coercive vibe. One attorney even warned the jury in closing that it felt like intimidation, but the judge did nothing. Deliberations dragged on, with a holdout juror initially favoring life without parole, but she later said the lack of instructions, that a single no vote on death could force life, pressured her to switch, fearing deadlock meant retrying the whole case. What if she'd known the truth? Could one voice have changed everything? In the end, the jury delivered a guilty verdict on the capital murder charge, rejecting self-defense outright. They then answered the special issues in favor of death. Yes, Ruiz posed a continuing threat to society. No, mitigating factors warranted life instead. On July 11, 2008, the court imposed the death sentence as required, sealing Ruiz's fate in a packed room heavy with emotion and unresolved questions about fairness. But appeals loomed. Would new revelations about bias and errors unravel it all? Wesley Lynn Ruiz spent nearly 15 years on Texas's death row, confined in the stark isolation of the Allen B. Polunsky Unit, a maximum security prison known for its harsh conditions. Death row inmates like him lived in solitary cells, about 60 square feet, with 23 hours a day locked inside, allowed just 1 hour for recreation in a cage-like area. Meals slid through a slot, visits strictly non-contact behind glass, and the constant hum of fluorescent lights and distant shouts created an environment that weighed heavy on the mind, a perpetual reminder of the end awaiting. Ruiz's days blended into a monotonous routine, reading books, perhaps reflecting on his past, and maintaining what connections he could through letters and limited calls. He held no prison job, as death row rules forbade it, but reports from his clemency petition paint a picture of quiet transformation. Deeply remorseful for killing Officer Mark Nix, Ruiz worked to better himself, focusing on personal growth amid the regret that gnawed at him. He expressed sorrow not just in words but in actions, guiding his 2 sons, Wes Jr. and Eric, with advice on life and relationships, urging them to avoid his mistakes. These fatherly interactions, though separated by bars and distance, showed a man grappling with his crimes, trying to build something positive from the ruins. Interactions with guards and inmates were minimal, given the solitary setup, conversations often limited to brief exchanges during cell checks or medical visits. No records show violent outbursts or disciplinary issues. Instead, Ruiz seemed to carry himself with composure, perhaps shaped by the PTSD and trauma from his youth that experts said still lingered. Did he find religion? A spiritual advisor stood by him in his final moments, suggesting faith offered some solace, though details of his beliefs remained private. Appeals consumed much of his time, with lawyers fighting tirelessly on grounds of racial bias in the jury, ineffective counsel who failed to present his abusive childhood, and even the state's use of expired execution drugs. Multiple rounds went to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals and federal courts, culminating in a U.S. Supreme Court denial just hours before his death. One appeal highlighted how jurors used anti-Hispanic stereotypes to deem him dangerous, with the foreman later admitting regret and supporting clemency. Another challenged the coercive courtroom atmosphere during trial, packed with armed police. Yet each effort failed, leaving Ruiz to face the slow grind of waiting, his remorse deepening as hope faded. He claimed a changed heart, but the system saw only the cop killer, the weight of his actions anchoring him to that cell until the end loomed. On February 1, 2023, Ruiz's final day began in the quiet routine of death watch at the Huntsville unit, where inmates are moved days before execution for close monitoring. He rose early, perhaps around dawn, in a holding cell near the chamber, with time for reflection or prayer. Visits came in the morning and afternoon. Family members, including those close to his sons, shared tearful goodbyes through a glass partition, offering last words of love and support. A spiritual advisor joined him, providing comfort in those heavy hours. No special last meal was granted. Texas ended that tradition in 2011, so Ruiz ate the standard prison fare available that day, likely a simple tray of whatever the unit served, such as sandwiches or basic entrees. As evening approached, the process turned solemn. Around 6 p.m., guards led him to the execution chamber, a small room with green walls and a viewing window. Strapped to the gurney, arms extended for 4 lines, he lay calm as witnesses gathered, Nix's mother and sister among them, feet away but worlds apart. Ruiz didn't look their way, focusing instead on his final statement. "I would like to apologize to Mark and the Nix family for taking him away from you," he said steadily. "I hope this brings you closure." He thanked his own family and friends for their support, then turned to his children. "Stand tall and continue to make me proud." Closing with, "Don't worry about me. I'm ready to fly." "All right, Warden. I'm ready to ride." The lethal injection of pentobarbital began shortly after, a single drug flowing through the tubes. He took 2 quick breaths, snored softly 11 times, then went still. At 6:41 p.m., 22 minutes later, a doctor pronounced him dead, ending a life marked by pain given and received, while the victim's families sought peace in the silence that followed. In the end, Wesley Ruiz's story closes a chapter of tragedy, from a broken start to a fatal choice and a long wait for reckoning. But was the death penalty true justice here, or does it highlight deeper flaws in a system that overlooked his trauma and possible racial bias?